My name is Donny. I serve as one of the pastors here at Aletheia. It's so good to be with you here today. We're going to be continuing our study in the book of Numbers. So if you have a Bible, you can go ahead and pull that out. The book of Numbers, as we have said often, if you're new, this is the book of the Bible that most people stop at when they're trying to read straight through the scriptures, and there's reasons why for that. But as we've been studying it, I hope many of you have found it to be quite compelling and even beyond interesting, but helpful and applicable to this day and age in which we live. We're going to be in specifically Numbers chapter 26 and 27. So if you want to use one of the Bibles in the seat back in front of you, you're more than welcome to grab one of those. It's going to be roughly, I think, page 125 through 127 are the pages that we'll be on in a minute. But the book of Numbers, just as a quick review before we jump in, is about the people of God, these Israelites who have left bondage and slavery and who are traversing this wilderness, going towards the promised land that God has given them or is giving to them. Specifically, God has shared or promised them that they would become a people. They promised Abraham, the patriarch of the family, that they would be a people, that they would inherit a place, and from that place, that land that they get, that their lives would be a testament or a testimony to God's greatness in the earth. And we see here that getting to that place, that place of promise in which they can live their lives, in which they would be a testimony to God's greatness, has had many fits and starts along the way. They have been traversing this wilderness and kind of turning away from God and coming back to God, experiencing judgment. But God is faithful over and over and over again to keep his promise throughout the book of Numbers. But specifically where we catch up today, we're almost to the end. In fact, next week, this is the penultimate study in it. Next week is the last week that we'll be looking at this book. Don't get too excited or woo that part. But as we catch up today, they're on the precipice of entering into that promised land. They've just come out of 40 years in which God has said, it's going to be another 40 years until you inherit this because of your lack of faith, because of your rebellion, because that you've not trusted me and you've turned away from me. Some of you remember that story with the spies that we talked about a few weeks ago. But here we are on the precipice of walking into the promise that God has for this people. And while we find ourselves here, I think there's an undeniable truth that we're going to need to grasp and that the scriptures will underscore today. And it's this idea, is that no matter where you are in the wilderness, it's always time to make disciples and train leaders. Wherever you're at in the wilderness, it's always time to make disciples and train leaders. Now, that's whether you're leading something or you're being led in some ways. God's plan is always unfolding around us. And so this plan, though, is not just for us, but for those who will come behind. And so no matter where we're at in the wilderness, it's always time to make disciples and train leaders. You know, the New Testament talks about this wilderness of life and compares the wilderness or the life that we experience to a wilderness time in which we are moving towards the promise of God. And so this really behooves us to kind of internalize what we're going to read about today. That's enough the introduction. I'm going to invite you to stand with me if you're able. Again, we're going to be in Numbers chapter 26. We're going to read 3 verses, and then we're going to skip over to Numbers chapter 27. Numbers 26, verse 1 says this. After the plague, the Lord said to Moses and to Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel, from 20 years old and upward by their fathers' houses, all in Israel who are able to go to war. And Moses and Eleazar, the priest, spoke with them in the plains of Moab by the Jordan of Jericho, saying, take a census of the people from 20 years old and upward, as the Lord commanded Moses. And then skipping over to Numbers chapter 27, starting in verse 12. The Lord said to Moses, go up into this mountain of Abiram and see the land that I have given to the people of Israel. When you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people, as your brother Aaron was, because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin, where the congregation quarreled, failing to uphold me as holy at the waters before their eyes. These are the waters of Meribah, of Kadesh, in the wilderness of Zin. Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation, who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in, that the congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep that have no shepherd. So the Lord said to Moses, Take Joshua the son of Nun, a man in whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Make him stand before Eleazar the priest and all the congregation, and you shall commission him in their sight. You shall invest him with some of your authority, that all the congregation of the people of Israel may obey. And he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall inquire for him by the judgment of the Urim before the Lord. At his word they shall go out, and at his word they shall come in, both he and all the people of Israel with him, the whole congregation. And Moses did as the Lord commanded him. He took Joshua and made him stand before Eleazar the priest and the whole congregation, and he laid his hands on him and commissioned him as the Lord directed through Moses. This is the word of the Lord. God, help us as we study. Help us to apply this word. God, as I prayed earlier, let none of us leave here unchanged, I ask. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. As I said before, the Israelites have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years now. They've been wandering, and in Numbers 26, we see a moment of transition, perhaps even a moment of renewal that is beginning to happen. It's like we read this part. Our reading today started with a census being taken. Now, you great Bible scholars, those of you who are here at the beginning, should remember that that's what happened at the beginning of the book of Numbers. That's why it's called Numbers. Light bulb? Anybody? Okay. So that's because they numbered the people. They took a census. And so this happens at the beginning of the book of Numbers. But now, after wandering for 40 years, before they enter into God's promised land, they stop and they take another census. A new census is taken. And at the same time, we see here that a new leader is being appointed. And this is signifying to us some things, namely that God's promise is still remaining. Even though they've not been perfect in the wilderness, even though they at times have utterly turned their back and have desired to go back to their bondage and their slavery and their captivity, even though God has at times been rather harsh in his judgment, or at least we would consider harsh, even though God's will was not always accomplished perfectly, even by the most important of leaders in their congregation, God's faithfulness has remained. This is a time of renewal for them. Now that's interesting to think about, because when we see these numbers, and I didn't read you all the numbers, because we would still be reading. But they numbered them by tribe, and if you kind of look back and forth, you see that their overall number stays roughly the same as a nation. But the numbers of the tribes has shifted. Some have grown, and some are now smaller, have shrunk. And this makes sense in light of some of the judgment that we've seen as we've read the book of Numbers. That some people have just not made it. Sections of families have been destroyed or cut off as a result of God's judgment falling on them for disobedience. But others have grown, and through this all, the size of this people has remained the same. We see God sustaining them even in the wilderness, sustaining their number, even though many will not make it into the promised land. God has been leading them towards this promise. But again, they're standing here on the precipice of this land, the place where God has promised to establish them as a testimony to his name. And I don't want to be super dramatic, but this is directly applicable, I think, for us as a local congregation. No, we are not standing on the precipice of this massive inheritance, but we find ourselves in a place of renewal and beginning. We find ourselves in this place as a church that's roughly 6 months and 1 week old, in a place of beginning. And for us, this becomes super important. For this one local expression of God's global church, as a people who is being established together to do hopefully God's will in our city, in our towns, and the surrounding areas, this is mightily important for us. You see, because leadership and discipleship, there is no better time to focus than at the beginning of something new in your life. There's no better time to focus on that than when you're trying to establish rhythms and become who God has called you to be. There's no better time for a church to focus on that than when it is young and endeavoring to become who God has called it to be. So this is important to us, and I think super helpful to us. But we see here in the passage, we see an interaction in this time of renewal. We see this interaction between Moses and God that takes place. In chapter 27, verse 12, it says this: the Lord says to Moses, "Go up into this mountain of Abiram and see the land that I have given to the people of Israel. When you have seen it, you also shall be gathered to your people, as your brother Aaron was, because you rebelled against my word in the wilderness of Zin, when the congregation quarreled, failing to uphold me as holy at the waters before their eyes." Part of going into this new promise is some people are not able to enter it. Now, the entire generation before, the entire generation who turned their back and refused to trust God and to receive the promise that he has for them, God has kept his word and said, well, you will not receive it. I'm going to give you your wish, but your kids are going to receive it. And so that whole generation has died out, but Moses is still there. And God speaks to Moses and he says, we're here, but remember, you can't enter. And just to kind of call back to some of the previous weeks as we were saying, the reason Moses isn't allowed to enter is because before the eyes of the people, when God was about to do a miracle to provide for them, to turn their hearts back to him yet again, Moses chose, rather than to elevate God, to elevate himself and to stand in the place of God, not just representing God, but as if he was the one who was providing for his people. In a place of frustration and anger at the complaining of those he was leading, he disobeys God and he strikes a rock and elevates himself, saying, really, you want us? Do you want me to provide for you again? When God is the great provider. So this is the moment in which they come to that time when God says, now go up this mountain, and I'm going to allow you to see the promise, even though you won't walk into it. And it's fascinating to me, Moses' response. His response, I'm sure if as best I can, try to put myself in Moses' shoes, which is not easy, and there's no way I possibly can, but just kind of comprehend the idea that you have been leading a group of people to a place in which God has promised you. You've been through the ups and the downs. You've seen the miraculous power of God flow through your leadership, and you have disqualified yourself from receiving that promise. And God is saying, okay, now is the time. They're going to get it, and you're not. Climb this mountain, though, and I'll let you see it. And I'm sure just the humanity of the moment, I'm sure that the regret probably flowed over him afresh and anew. I'm sure that he rethought all of his actions again in those moments of failure. And yet the only thing we have recorded here is not him bemoaning that fact. We don't have him begging God to please let him step foot and to receive the promise with his people. All he simply says is recorded in verse 16 and 17. This is fascinating. He says this: let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation who shall go out before them and come in before them, who shall lead them out and bring them in. The congregation of the Lord may not be as sheep that have no shepherd. This is what Moses says. He says, okay, God, yes, sir. But please, for the sake of these people, do not let a leadership vacuum follow me. For the sake of your people, please appoint someone who will lead them. Don't let them be sheep without a shepherd. Sheep and shepherds. The sheep and shepherd language actually, you said, should sound familiar to some of you. That kind of weaves its way throughout the scriptures as we read through the rest of the Hebrew Bible and into the New Testament. This imagery that we see kind of unpacked over time is used as an image. Sheep without shepherd, or this idea of kind of represents vulnerability. Sometimes I can't speak. Vulnerability and chaos. When Israel lacked godly leadership, they were scattered and weak, we see later on in the book of First Kings. And the prophet Ezekiel actually brings this up. In Zechariah, we see that the people suffer because they have no, quote, shepherd. There's nobody to lead them. And in Matthew 9, verse 35, Jesus also picks up this language, and it's fascinating. He says this in his own ministry. And Jesus went through all the cities and the villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. Listen to this. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Moses is concerned for his people. He didn't want them to become like that. He didn't want chaos and weakness and harassment to rule over them. And so he asked God, would you provide godly leadership for this people? The solution to this condition of being sheep without a shepherd all throughout scriptures is the same over and over again. It's leadership and discipleship. It's godly leadership specifically and discipleship. Now, Moses has been shepherding the people through the wilderness. Now, God is the chief shepherd. Jesus is our chief shepherd. God is the chief shepherd. But yes, Moses has been leading. Could you imagine what it would have been like without that leadership, imperfect as it was, through the wilderness? When they followed Moses, who was following God, when they followed Moses, they were led well. But when they rebelled, things began to fall apart. And what we see in these scriptures is that leadership matters. Shepherds matter. And in every season, God is calling us to train them. God's calling us to train leaders and shepherds. He's calling us to make disciples. Side note, the word pastor, it just means shepherd. That's what the word means. And so oftentimes we talk about somebody having a pastoral gift. It means they have a shepherding gift or this kind of caring, leading gift. But notice another thing that I keep saying. I keep saying us. No matter where we are in this wilderness, no matter what season we are in, God is calling us to make leaders and disciples. And this is where it gets a little easy for us to kind of just distance ourselves from a task at hand. Over and over again, we see in the scriptures, God is called the God of whom? God, the God of Abraham, and you can talk back. This is church. Isaac, thank you, and Jake. God is a God of generations. He's a God of generations. He cares about the generations. And the promised land that he is giving them, again, that they're about to walk into, is this land for a people. And the responsibility never rests on a person to train and instill the generations who come behind. It rests within a people. That a people is called to train those who are called behind. A people is called to care for the next generation. But oftentimes we as people, we like to do the same thing that those who come before us said. We don't want to do this because it's hard. We don't think often about training those who come behind us very practically in many things that we do in life. We don't do this in our jobs a lot of times. I think of some of you are entrepreneurs or you started your own business. Some of you know entrepreneurs who've started their own business. And at some point or another, that business will grow and it'll either grow to the capacity of the person who started it. And maybe they're happy with that. And they don't want to give it up. I'll give you this example. We used to buy donuts at this great donut shop. I don't want to talk bad about them, so I won't say the name, but they're a great donut shop in Medford. And you should totally go check it out. And ask me the name afterwards and I'll give it to you. But we used to stop by for our church to pick up donuts for our Cambridge congregation years ago for our volunteers. Oh no, I just made a promise. Volunteers, there's no promise for next week, but we would get these amazing donuts and we'd bring them in. And we would show up and that donut shop would open, I think, at 7 a.m. 7 a.m. No, it would open at 6:30, but the donuts were always ready right at 7. And so we would get this massive order of these donuts and we would bring them to our volunteers. And every Sunday we would show up and we would be there at 6:30 and we'd sit and wait a half hour to get the donuts. So the problem was we were supposed to be at church at 7 with our volunteers. So we're always skating in the last minute, but we had great food, and we sent one of our guys, Kevin, to go and talk to the owner. He lived close by, and he walked in, and they wouldn't even let him talk to the owner. So he starts talking to the great nice lady behind the counter, and he's like, "Listen, if you could just have those donuts ready 10 minutes earlier." We're buying like $350 donuts worth of donuts a week. It was like that's a little much. $150 worth of donuts a week, and like 10 minutes for $150. Can you just get here? And she's like, no, the owner doesn't get here until 6:30. That's when he's gonna get here. And we're like, well, would you like to get here 10 minutes earlier? And we'll even throw in a little extra for you because we just got to get there. It's making it, we can't be this late. And every week, and she says, no, well, I would, but he won't give the recipe to anybody else. And it's like he won't give you, no, he won't trust it. So so we literally asked the question, well, what are you going to do when he dies? It's like, well, the business is just going to close. And so that's the decision that he's made. But unfortunately, generations from now won't get to experience the amazing donuts that come right out of Bedford Square at that amazing donut shop. Similarly, we do this a lot, and you see this time in businesses who don't scale. And I'm not talking bad about a business. Let's say that your call is to build a business that is family run and is going to, that is the size. You're at the size God has called you to. Hear me. That's okay. But what I am saying is there are moments in our lives where we get to the point where we can't move past our limitations unless we train other people to do what we can do. That becomes the limiting factor, not our ability to grow, but the fact that we will have to make a choice. Are we going to train others or are we not? And that is super inconvenient. Why don't we train other leaders? Because we think, first of all, we can do it better, and it's inconvenient to train somebody else. Because no matter how much we train them, they'll never do it quite as good as we think we can do it. It's inconvenient. There are other reasons why we don't train other people. Sometimes we think it's somebody else's job to train leaders or disciple others, even in spiritual things. And that's reality is we're just lazy at that point. Oh, that's somebody else's job. They'll take care of that. It's laziness. Or here's this is, let's be honest. Some people are just knuckleheads and we don't want to work with them. We don't want to train them. They're going to mess up. It's not that they can't do it better. They're just going to mess up. And constantly we begin to think of others as not having the goods to get it done. And so why would we waste our time investing in them? They're just going to mess it up. This one racks me. And then sometimes, you know what? Helping lead a church that has grown over the years to be now 4 congregations. I remember sitting with our senior pastor, Pastor Adam, and we were sitting in the room together, and we were kind of complaining to one another about the people on our staff who were just making boneheaded mistakes. And then we stopped, and one of us, I would say it's me, but I don't want to be wrong and brag as if it was me, because it might not have been me, because man, sometimes you're just hit with a realization like, oh my gosh, I'm talking about people who are doing it better than I was at their age. And look at all the mistakes that I made, and who let me help plant a church when I was 29 years old? What was that about? You start having these realizations like, oh, they're actually further along and better than I was in their age. But we forget those things. We forget what it was like for us. And we underestimate people. But I think many times the thing that keeps us from it is we just don't feel qualified to do it. Like, I'm not good enough to train somebody else. I'm not good enough to instill the principles found in these scriptures. I don't have the goods to get it done. And Moses here talks to God, and he asks God, hey, would you appoint someone who can lead these people? And God says he's going to appoint Joshua. Now, Joshua, to this point in the scriptures, has played a somewhat minor role. But if you remember, if you could remember what happened in his life and had the points that he's kind of come up in the story of the scriptures, we see that he was faithful in a ton of, well, I don't want to say small ways because some of them are pretty big, but he was faithful in moments that didn't get a whole lot of play in the scriptures. In Exodus 17, he bravely leads the Israelites into battle against some pretty significant foes. We see that he is a man of humility as well. He's listed as Moses' assistant or or that he ministers to Moses, that he serves Moses, and he accompanies Moses partway up Mount Sinai. We see in this cool interaction in Numbers 11, for those of you who've been reading with us, we see this interaction between him and Moses, in which there's Eldad and Medad, these two guys who have great names, begin to prophesy in the camp, and Joshua's like, don't let them do that, because they'll take some of they're taking like the credit for God. They're standing in your place, Moses. Don't let them be like this. Don't let them prophesy in God's name. They shouldn't be doing this. And Moses actually stops them. Even though he was being loyal and super zealous, Moses says, no. He teaches him in that moment. He says, would that all would prophesy like this? Would that everyone have this kind of interaction with God? And he's teachable in that moment. We know that he's listed as one of the spies to go in Numbers chapter 13 to spy out the land. One of the two that remained faithful between him and Caleb. And so we have this list of qualifications because we know the story. But when you read Numbers chapter 27, God lists none of those things. God only lists one. He lists one qualification. Did you catch it? So the Lord said to Moses, this is verse 18, take Joshua the son of Nun, a man whom is the Spirit, and lay your hand on him. Joshua walks with the Spirit of God. Yes, he has all these qualifications, but they're all secondary to the one that God cares about, that he walks with the Spirit of God. We see this actually, the kind of the seed bed of this in Exodus chapter 33. I think we have it for the screen for you guys. It says, now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside of the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise up, and each would stand at his tent door and watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak to Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people to rise up and worship, each at his tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. Now watch this. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua the son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. Moses would finish conversing with God and he would leave and there would be worship happening, but Joshua would stay in God's presence. He would spend time with God. This is the qualification God recognizes first and foremost when appointing Joshua, that he would stay and meet with God. But God calls all of us to make disciples. We'll see that Jesus reinforces this idea later. But it begins in the place, if we look at Joshua's life, this didn't begin with simply, he got all of his, he didn't build his resume. He wasn't going to the right schools. He wasn't getting the right skills, the right internships. Though he had some of those things, the thing that was most credited to him as the reason for him becoming the leader that God had for him to be, was that he had God's Spirit. He had been around someone who had walked with God's Spirit closely. When we think about leadership, it's also important to us to ask at least the ancillary question. If we want to become leaders and we want to lead well, what leaders are we willing to serve? Who are the people that we're willing to minister to in the biblical sense? And are we the kind of people who are sitting before the Lord even longer than we have to for our job? Side note about this, isn't this the dream though? Like what we see happening with Moses and Joshua, isn't this the dream in our own lives, in our families, in our churches? That God's promises that they would be realized not just for us, but for the next generation? That the people coming behind us would take all that we have and take it further than us? That they would do greater things than us? Isn't that the dream? Like, I don't want my kids to measure up to me, have to try to measure. In fact, my hope is not in a weird way, like I want to overparent or put weird pressure on my kids, but my hope is that if I do my job well, they'll go further, they'll have a better life, they'll live more godly, that they'll have a greater impact in the earth, and that people will forget about my name and know their name a little bit more. No, I don't want to live vicariously through them or to somehow feel better about myself. But if I do my job right, they, in some ways, will take they'll take the torch farther. The battles that I fight and the demons that I slay with my life, they won't have to slay, and they can fight new battles and do new things and do new great things for God. Well, but not just our kids, but our church as well. That if we do this right, the people coming behind us, the kids who are down in Aletheia Kids right now, if we do this right, they'll take it farther than we ever could. Praise God if that happens. How amazing would that be? Last night in this room, none of you, well, most of you were invited. Our Aletheia youth had a worship night in here. I wasn't even invited. I didn't even come. And so, in fact, we asked, and my daughter was like, actually, it's kind of for the youth. I'm like, okay, you guys go do it. Go do it. Was it as excellent as if we had our best sound engineer and our best, worship leader and all of Aletheia on the stage? Was it as excellent? No, probably not. Was the Spirit of God here? Absolutely. And maybe even thicker. Maybe. I wasn't here, but I think so. God cares about the next generation. God cares. And we can play this out in all the different ways, but this requires something of us as a church. This requires something of us as individuals. We have to give ourselves to the people who are coming behind us, because no matter where we're at in this wilderness of life, no matter what's going on for us, it's always time for us to make disciples and train leaders. No matter where we are, no matter what challenges we are facing, it is always time for us to do this. Moses asks for a new leader, so God appoints Joshua. Joshua, again, he's the faithful spy. He's the one who stayed in the tent of meeting. He's the one who served Moses, ministered to Moses faithfully for years before stepping into this leadership. And you know what I find super fascinating? Some of you know this. Some of you have probably, this is the first time you hear this. You know who else has the same name as Joshua? Jesus. Yeah, it's the same name. It's the same name. Moses is led through the wilderness, but Joshua leads them into the promise. We were sitting at, I was having breakfast with some guys from church, and Tim Weimer said, I was so proud of him, he was like, oh, Moses can lead us through the wilderness, but we need a Joshua to take us into the promise. I was like, yeah, you're catching up. Like, so we have a Moses who can lead us through, but we need a Joshua. We need a Jesus who can take us in fully into the promise of God. Moses intercedes for the people, but Joshua gives them the victory. In the same way, Jesus, he is our true and better Moses, and he's also our true and better Joshua. He leads us through the wilderness of this world and this life, and he leads us into, right now towards, but ultimately into the eternity of our promised land when heaven and earth come back together. And all the sad things come true, and we experience God in the way that he has promised us. This is why I think when Jesus looks at the crowds, he does something remarkable in Matthew chapter 9. We started reading it, but we're going to read it one more time. I'm going to add a verse. It says this, Matthew 9. Actually, we'll start in verse 36. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Then he says to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. After Moses is being quoted here, Jesus gives a very direct application. Pray to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. These sheep need shepherds. Mixing the metaphors, but that's the point. And Jesus, honestly, he's building a bridge here in this moment from Numbers 27 that we've read to what he's going to apply later at the end of the book of Matthew and Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20. When he, after his resurrection, says to his disciples, he comes and says that all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey all that I've commanded you. And lo, or behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. He is saying here that the work of shepherding doesn't stop. It only multiplies over and over and over again. It multiplies. Again, the New Testament regularly compares this life that we're living to a wilderness. And Jesus' words here still ring true. How do we live in the wilderness no matter where we're at? We go make disciples and we train leaders. That's what we do. That's what we are called to do. That means that we continue to grab those around us and pull them in our way towards the purposes of God. And one day when they pass us, we cheer them on and we don't get jealous when they do. That we see the callings on those who are coming behind us and not just their knuckleheadedness. I'm so thankful that people didn't look at me and merely see me for all the things that I did wrong, because man, there were a lot of things. Still are a lot of things. But I'm so glad that there were leaders who were ahead of me, who saw the call of God on my life at times when I didn't even see it myself, and who pulled me along in their wake and then pushed me into the purposes that God had for me. Jesus calls us to do this. But this is the way that God has worked all the way through the book of Numbers, and the way that's going to work for us as a church going forward. And this is why these stories are so important, because at different points in our life, we are going to be in one seat or the other. At different seasons and different contexts and different moments, we're either going to be in a leadership seat or a following seat. And it's just as in the sense of this, just as Joshua experienced the leadership of Moses and the discipleship of Moses, there need to be people around you who experience your leadership and your discipleship. If you're a Christian today, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, there are people that you need to be pouring your life into. So the question begs to be asked, who is it? Who are you training? Parents, this is an easy one. You got a captive audience. They're dependent upon you to eat. You can pour your life into those children. How are you training them? For those of you who aren't parents or aren't yet parents, who are you giving your life to in a way to train into the purposes of God? And already I'm asking that question. Some of you are thinking, well, I'm not far enough along. I don't have the resume. I don't know my Bible well enough. The first person to pour their life into me was about 6 months younger than me and wasn't that much further along than me in the Bible. He was just a guy I met on my university campus who said, I love God, and I'm about a chapter and a half ahead of you in the Bible. Let me show you what I've learned. That's it. It's going to be one step ahead to give what God has given you to somebody else. And at some point, if that person passes you, let them turn around and start helping you out. Who are you pouring your life into? Who are you training? If you're wondering where to even start on this process of growing and getting a chapter ahead, I want you to know that we have clear discipleship and leadership development in this church. I know we're young and we're new, and many of you are new to this church family. We're going to be going over some of that in our Discover Discipleship moment immediately following this. And you can ask all your questions there if you're super new. Come and get the free food. Stay for the information about discipleship. But there are opportunities for all of you. If you know you need to be discipled, join a group. If you know you're not quite ready to disciple others, that's okay. We want to help give you the tools that you need. Wherever you're at in this journey, we've got a spot for you. We've got years worth of content we can instill in you. We've got, yes, our groups. We've got establishing foundations, which many of you have been through. If you've been through establishing foundations, then you are more than capable of walking somebody else through the basics of the Bible. You have all the tools at your fingertips. But for those of you who are there and you're like, I want to grow in my own understanding of the scriptures. We've got years worth of Leadership 215 on the backside of establishing foundations and making disciples and these classes that we have for you. Again, we'll unpack all of that outside of this moment. But there are paths for you to equip you. The whole idea there is to equip you to make disciples and train leaders. A true leader, a good leader, is always training their replacement. So if you're leading something, please keep that in mind. But sometimes we also need to be people who are led. Joshua didn't step into leadership overnight. He served, he ministered to Moses, and he waited. And if you find yourself in many areas of your life, in your job, in a group setting, if you find yourself in a season of that kind of preparation, be faithful in those small things and seek God's Spirit most of all. That is the greatest thing to prepare you for what God has for you. But all of us, again, no matter where we are in the season of wilderness, it's always time for us to make disciples. It's always time for us to train leaders. It doesn't matter if you're in the beginning stages of a wilderness season, or if you're on the edge of receiving your promise that God has for you. Please realize that this is all about a bigger story than just for you or just for us, even in this room. That this is about those who are coming behind us. And so we must embrace these promises for ourselves, yes, but also for the next generation. The Great Commission, I'll just leave you this one thought. The Great Commission, go make disciples, doesn't start with when things get better or you arrive. It doesn't start with now that you've got it figured out, you totally understand the Bible. It says, Jesus is saying, if you know me, go make disciples. Go do this thing. Engage other people. Teach them to obey everything that I've commanded, and I'm going to be with you always to the very ends of the earth, the very ends of the age. I'm going to be with you. This is a now statement that is for all of us. And Jesus believed in this so much that he gave his life for it. That's what we're going to end with today.